Thank you for joining today's talk with artist Robert Zhao and conservation biologist Yong Ding Li. We appreciate your presence on this Saturday afternoon among those a lot of events happening during this show. And this talk has been organized in conjunction with the exhibition Seeing Forest, which is currently on view on the Gallery 3 at SEM, on the same floor as this space. And Seeing Forest was originally conceived for the Singapore Pavilion for the 2024 Venice Biennale and is now being presented as a homecoming exhibition. So it represents the culmination of Robert Zhao's almost a decade of observation and research on Singapore's secondary forest. I'm Haeju Kim, and I was the curator of Singapore Pavilion, and together with Robert, we prepared and conceived this exhibition. So today's session aims to share the process of preparing for the exhibition, especially through the ecological backdrop of secondary forest, through the perspectives of the artist himself, and Ding Li, who has been friends with the artist since they were 16 and has frequently collaborated with him, providing consultation on various projects. So the session will begin with Robert presenting his reflections on his past observation of the secondary forest. And this will be followed by Ding Li sharing his own insights on secondary forest from his perspective. So after that, we will have a dialogue between three of us, and then we'll have a Q&A session where you can also ask questions. So without further ado, let's first hear from Robert Zhao. Please join me welcoming Robert.
Hi, I'm Robert. Thanks everyone for coming this Saturday afternoon. I guess there are a lot of, maybe some foreign guests here. So I'll be talking a lot about local spaces here. So it might be very lost to you. I don't know if it will be, but let's try, okay? So Seeing Forest, this talk is actually part of an exhibition that's just down the hallway, Seeing Forest in Gallery 3. So I won't exactly talk so much about what's in the exhibition because it's there and you can see. So I'm going to talk about things that I've done with my good friend, Dr. Yong Ding Li, since we were kind of 16, and how this has influenced some of the things that you have seen today. So this is very weird because I'm reading from a handphone. So bear with me. So this is in 2000. So this is one of my earlier photographic works when I was still a student, 24 years ago. It's, I think, one of the first few trips I went with Ding Li, Dr. Yong. I'm just going to call him Ding Li because I don't really call him Dr. Yong in any context. So maybe for Singaporeans, you can kind of try to guess where this is. And I guess maybe the chimneys at the back can give you a clue, or not really, because they were destroyed in the 90s. So what we have here is actually Tengah in 2000. This is not Tengah in 2021, 22, when it was deforested. This is in 2000 where it was already deforested once. So me and Ding Li was along the Bukit Batok Road, and we noticed that there was some deforestation. But actually we were there because when the deforestation was happened, there was a pond, and there were actually ducks inside. What were the whistling ducks? And so we were both very young, very new to bird watching, and we were going crazy that there were ducks in this really destroyed landscape. And then I took a lot of photographs there because there was just so much destruction and the land was destroyed. So these are all albizia trees, most of them, actually. I would like to point out young and old albizia trees. And the chimneys at the back, actually they were from brick factories. So when we kind of entered the space there was not much trees, it was barren land, and remnants of those brick factories were still there. And I think both of us also don't know why there was deforestation and what was there before 2000, but it was just like that. And then we fast forward to the near future. This is what Tengah is going to be. The city, the forest city or something like that. It's the city of the future, right? Where everything will be nature and humans in harmony. This is kind of artist's impression. And today, actually why I started with Tengah Forest is because in 2000 there was deforestation, and nearer to 2021, actually in 20 years time, Tengah has become yet another forest. And this is a secondary forest, and this is just a petition at that time in 2021 to kind of stop this deforestation from being redeveloped into new town, to kind of just keep some of that secondary forest there. So for me, when I was compiling some facts or some photographs of my practice, I started looking at some of the very first pictures I had of secondary forest, and I realized it was Tengah, and it was already deforested once, and then in 20 years it came back, and then yet it's gone. And so today, if you visit, the whole space is actually quite developed into a new town. And actually, then I'll go back even further. This is 1999 in Tuas and Tanah Merah. This is the reclaimed land. And Tanah Merah, sorry, wrong caption. Tanah Merah reclaimed land. And that's Ding Li, fresh out of secondary school. And this is the very first trip I made with Ding Li as a friend. And he said, let's go to Tanah Merah. And then I think we walked for 2 hours. And it was just empty land and sand, because it was freshly reclaimed land. So the lands, and in Singapore, a lot of our land is reclaimed. And this is an old map, so it's not very updated, but the gray parts are kind of show you what is kind of being reclaimed. I think that is even more now. And we've been reclaiming the land since 1822. And as much as 22% of our land is reclaimed. So up till today, at any point of time at our shore, there's always a kind of a sandy landscape that's growing and growing towards the sea. So this is, sorry, Tanah Merah, not Tuas. And once again, like the deforested landscape in Tengah, the textures and the kind of the landscape was just kind of something then the 17-year-old me kind of didn't really see in Singapore. So I was kind of quite, I don't know, mystified. And then I kind of took a lot of pictures there. Again, this is Tanah Merah. But the main reason why Ding Li and I were there was because, once again, there was marshes, temporary marshes that was created during the time when the space was reclaimed, and then all these scrubs and short vegetation will come out, and actually there was a lot of birds, right? And back then I was not a bird watcher, but Ding Li was already a very I would say enthusiastic bird watcher, and then he would make this trip every week to kind of just see the migratory birds that will actually land in this reclaimed land. And I guess one of those that birds, maybe he will share some of the rare birds that he saw back then at this space. But this is him again, a birder to watch, in December 2007, and that's him using a binoculars to look at actually a Himalayan griffon vulture that appeared in Tanah Merah, at Tanah Merah. And so one of the strange migratory birds that appear in Singapore for the last 30 years, actually, every year they have been coming. And this was the one that we saw actually in Bukit Batok quite recently. But the reason why I talk about this sighting is because a lot of these spaces or secondary forests or reclaimed land in Singapore, actually, they are not just used by animals that are here. Actually, for a good part of the year, from October to March, if I'm correct, a lot of birds passing through Singapore to go along the East Asian Flyway would actually make use of all these spaces that we have up in Singapore to rest for a few days, a few weeks, or a few months even. And so these spaces actually, maybe these birds will use every year that they migrate. So it may be in Tuas, a wasteland, it may be a drain, or it may be anything. But what is insignificant to us may be kind of quite important to birds that travel along this East Asian flyway. So their habitat is not confined geographically by country like us, but they have no borders. The whole space is kind of their home. And because Ding Li and I often talk about this migratory species, and then he actually did write a paper hypothesizing why the Himalayan vulture, actually the young ones, has been coming to Singapore, flying so far and landing in Singapore. And one of the main reasons he hypothesized is that due to sanitization in their homeland, that causes the young ones to kind of scavenge even further and further to look for food. Because most of the ones that landed in Singapore are young and hungry. Not just in Singapore, actually throughout the whole East Asian flyway, you can kind of see them. But again, this is just a theory, right? We don't really know why this is happening. So this is along the rail corridor near my house at Bukit Panjang, and those are kind of newly built flats. So a lot of the spaces that I like to look at is kind of happening in this kind of situation where the blocks of flats are kind of nearby at the back, and then you suddenly have this kind of strange corridor or small forest, and then there will be kind of animal kind of just thriving inside these small spaces. And a lot of time, these spontaneous growth secondary forests are kind of just everywhere and anywhere, and they take up almost as much as 20% of the landscape here in Singapore. This is actually a scene from the video that is inside the exhibition, with an older soundtrack that I used for another theatre production. So you do see all these roasting parakeets and long-tailed parakeets inside the secondary forest. They feed in smaller groups. But what is kind of a spectacle or a strange thing that happens in different parts of Singapore, Clementi, Yishun, and in this case, Choa Chu Kang, is that during the evening times, actually hundreds of these parrots will actually start flocking to a few trees in a single area, causing a kind of loud spectacle that goes on for 15 to 20 minutes. So smaller flocks will eventually join together to form big flocks. Then eventually they will kind of land here in a single tree. In this case, a single tree during that time in 2021, 2022. And I got to know this phenomenon because Ding Li also is part of this parrot count. Actually, every year they have volunteers counting parrots at different parts of Singapore. I was with him counting at Clementi, and then we also counted at Choa Chu Kang. So how many? Maybe 2,000, right? Maybe a safe estimate. And I've also organized tours actually with during some of my exhibitions for the public to go and kind of witness this. So at 6:45 you go, and maybe there are miners and crows, but somewhere along the way you start to see these parrots slowly come in. And by 7:20, actually it becomes quite quiet because once they settle down, you don't really know that they are in the trees anymore. And you can see actually this happens quite near apartment blocks. And it can be, I guess it can be kind of strange and intimidating on why there are thousands of parrots flying outside your window every evening. And I think the interesting thing about this phenomena is that you can't really understand why they keep doing this. It's not the tree species, it's not the location, it's not that there's food, or so it's a real question mark on why they persist on going back to the same area to roost every night for not really sure how long this is. So inside the film, actually, I have some in the exhibition that there's this kind of stories that are served with question marks. It's quite open-ended about how non-human beings, non-human species, kind of live along with people here, humans here in Singapore. So this is when I led the tour at Choa Chu Kang to kind of just let people. We arrive before the parrots so that you can kind of see how the parrots move into the neighborhoods. And then you can see them kind of flocking through all the different apartment blocks before they finally land on 2 or 3 of the trees. And of course, it's not just the parrots. There are miners also roosting there in huge numbers, in the hundreds, and also crows, maybe little more than 100. So this junction is actually quite a bit wrong of activity for birds in the evening. This is a stand of albizia trees, and I heard from a previous talk that usually a single stand of trees are of the same age. This is from a talk I had last year. And so you can actually, all of them are the same age, and they are quite common. And you can see actually in the middle there's a changeable hawk eagle nest, right? And albizia trees are actually quite common, one of the most common trees we have in our secondary forest. And because I have the same species of trees, if you love trees, you will know that sometimes they form this phenomenon called crown shyness. So if you're fortunate enough to walk under the grove of albizia trees, you can see that they try to avoid each other on the canopy, forming little islands for each tree. And then this is kind of something that you can observe when you walk into the stand of albizia trees. So being in the secondary forest, I always encounter albizia trees, and they're kind of really tall. They're almost twice as tall as native trees. And they are always kind of this main tall being inside the forest, easily the tallest tree. Actually, if you travel along the expressway, the BKE, most of the tall trees you see are also albizia trees. And I've seen them come and go, but mainly now they are always going. And it's also, I guess I've said, the most common tree I can see here in Singapore, also the tallest, and could be the contender for the fastest growing tree in the world. It can reach a height of 7 meters in a year, 15 meters in 3, and 30 meters in 10 years if the conditions are right. And it's originally from the Solomon Islands and the Maluku Islands in Indonesia. And also known as a pioneering species, meaning that it's one of the first species to go in to kind of repopulate the land. So in this case, the secondary forest could either be a rubber plantation before, a kampong, or even a military barrack. And then once those buildings or industries have left and the ground is laid to waste, you have albizia trees going in, trying to kind of regreen or rewild the area again. And it's usually the first to grow. And because the roots go wide rather than deep, and they are often growing on already hard floor like tarmac or cement, but yet they grow so tall. So in our monsoon conditions, they actually fall all the time. So what you're looking at here is a destroyed fence that an albizia fell off. So they often do fall, but actually when they fall, right, they serve other ecological purposes as well in the forest. So not only are they alien in our landscape, they are imported, but they are also considered quite dangerous if they are very near where people stay. So between 1965, Singapore's independence from the British, and the early 1990s, many old plantations and military camps are left undeveloped, creating large amount of secondary forests in Singapore. And then in the recent decade, actually, a lot of these secondary forests are being cleared for various reasons, housing, manufacturing, and in the early 2000s, we have started to have some reactions from the public, and it has become actually visibly harder to remove these forests from the public. And you can see this is actually near Kranji Road, and actually the apartments on the picture on the right, those apartment blocks that are far behind there, that's where I stay from Bukit Panjang. That's where a lot of the video was taken in the exhibition. So and also, if you look at the forest that was cleared, all the trees, all the white trunks, those are all albizia trees. Okay, and then you can see that it's because it's dominated by non-native albizia trees. That's why it's okay for these forests to go, right? Because they are not native, and these are not good forests. And so the very first time, actually, when I entered the secondary forest with Ding Li, he also gave me the same narrative. This is a lousy space. And I mean, he meant it in a good way, because I was saying like, what's interesting in this space, what can be done. He said, actually, it's full of introduced species. You probably get cats and rats here, and it's really nothing interesting. You don't waste your time. And then, which is true, because actually the secondary forest can be quite boring for the untrained eye, or if you're just casually going through. It is really what Ding Li has said, and it's poor in a way. So a lot of my work in the exhibition try to see if that you can find anything as an artist, not a scientist. What are the things that you can look at in the forest that can make it meaningful, or other perspectives to try to engage with it. It's only after Venice, so this is not in the Venice project, but this is a more recent thing, because I keep talking about albizia in my talk. And I'm also doing a project with the museum in our public libraries. I started to wonder, when did the first albizia tree came to Singapore? And actually, the written records are quite poor, so nobody really knows. And this is the earliest photograph that I found. It was from 1890, and it shows an albizia tree in front of a military barrack. And then I started to look, and I collect all these photographs from eBay. Anything that shows a kind of plantation, deforestation, or just landscapes of Singapore from the past, I will and they're cheap. I will kind of acquire it for my work, and I use them in the books that I publish. And then I started to look through all my old photographs, and I realized actually, as early as 1900s, you find albizia trees already in the landscape when the land is being deforested. And this is from, sorry, I don't have the year, but it's in the 1892 or 94 Garden Bulletin, and there's an entry on the albizia saying that it's already a well-known shade tree, and it's actually imported here as a shade tree for coffee. So coffee plantation is actually earlier than rubber plantation. So actually the albizia tree has been here for a really long time. So not everyone demonizes the albizia tree. This is a research that I think Ding Li kind of help out. Shape is actually a very specific study on the changeable hawk eagle and its breeding population in Singapore. And actually the report talks about the population increase of this native eagle and how it kind of thrive in secondary woodlands, which is secondary forest, and almost always is nesting on the albizia tree. Now the albizia tree is chosen by eagles to nest on because they are just taller. Like I said, they grow fast and tall, and their branches are quite weak and it falls. But because precisely the branches are weak, large eagles can find nest materials to build their huge nest. So actually it's not just changeable hawk eagle, but a lot of other native raptors have learned to kind of nest on these albizia trees. So this is just one of the kind of, I would guess, counter narrative that we have to albizia trees being in Singapore. So something good out of something bad. But still they're seen as alien and useless. So I began to wonder why the albizia tree can thrive so well here in Singapore. What does it do in its homeland in the Maluku Island? And so to kind of try to find out, I did a reverse journey. I went back to where it came from. So you can see this is Singapore on the left hand with an X, and the Maluku Islands where I went to is on that X. So it's almost on the same kind of line. And so I guess our climate must be quite the same. And it was not hard to find the tree actually. So the curator, Haeju, also went with me to kind of, because she was writing an essay and we were creating an exhibition together. So we found our first contender, a really large albizia tree, larger than those that we see in Singapore. Is almost, I think, 30 over meters. And this was actually by the side of a really old road. And then we asked our guide, where can you find albizia trees in the Maluku Islands? Is it in the forest? No, actually it's always also by the side of the road. And what we noticed was that this was an old road, so this tree was rather old. And then on new roads, the albizia trees there were kind of young. So in a way, it's doing the same thing as in Singapore. Whenever a road was cleared, presumably all the forest around it is cleared for the road. And then the albizia tree will come to kind of grow on those disturbed landscapes again. So it's doing exactly the same thing as it does in Singapore, but this is still a bit strange, because this is its origination point. Why is it behaving like kind of an urban witness like it does in Singapore? So our guide himself also has a albizia tree, and he has two, and he's also not pretty sure where or when the albizia trees kind of came, but it could be because the land was cleared from another plantation, then it started growing, but there was just kind of two of them. It was not until the last day of our research trip, and we kind of were just touring the island, and then we found a volcanic lake. By that time, I already given up on looking for albizia trees and the reasons why they're there. And we just see hundreds of albizia trees along this lake. And then I realized that because it's a volcanic lake, it was formed after a kind of volcanic eruption, that the albizia kind of thrive after natural disasters. Like if a typhoon or a volcano eruption will kind of clear the land or destroy all vegetation, the albizia will be the first to go there to pioneer, to make it green, to make it livable for other species. So in the Maluku Island is kind of quite reactive towards natural disasters. But in Singapore, it's reactive to more man-made disturbances, which is not as strong as a volcanic eruption, but maybe by an excavator. Once the land is cleared, it will just come in. It's in its DNA just to make land livable for non-human species. So I'm going to show you just some images. I mean, you've been looking at the images of mainly albizia trees, its seeds and its leaves. And they are mainly from 5 albizia trees. I'm going to show you the images that we took of 5 trees, one from the Maluku Islands, one from a albizia tree in Punggol, one from Tampines, one from Jurong, and one from Woodlands, all near the libraries where the exhibition is going. And the exhibition is called 5 Albizia, and you kind of just show you how what an original albizia tree in its home looks like versus one that is supposedly an introduced and alien species. How it's kind of like portraits, how they are perceived and how they live. And also to end this with a quote that I read from activists of secondary forest, that secondary forest should not be seen as second tier, but to seen as a second chance. Okay, I'm going to end here. I'm going to pass the mic over to Ding Li, who will kind of carry on with his talk about the forest.
I'm very pleased to meet many of you here, most of you for the first time. Robert is an old friend and a long-time collaborator. And as Robert has already explained, I've known him for 20 years, maybe 20 years, close to 20 years. We are from the same secondary school, pun not intended. But we have very different career trajectories. So Robert became a visual artist, and I learned a lot about art from Robert, whereas for myself, I became an ecologist, which means that my work is a bit more dry and sometimes a bit overwhelmingly technical. But we, through the birding trips we had over the last 10, 20 years, we find that there are lots of things that interest both of us. And I'm just here to give you a little bit of context of our work together and how he has also influenced me. He says that I've influenced him, but he's also influenced me. So, but for a start, I just wanted to make a statement. Maybe this statement is a bit outdated. I must say that I really hate secondary forests. All right, and I think Robert has reinforced that point. Right, he says that Ding Li says that they're lousy forests. It is true. I'm not bullshitting you. All right, I really hate secondary forests, and I think that's partly the result of the training that we have as ecology students in university. So in university, we were always taught about the importance of primary forests, like how great primary forests were. And the first few trips I've ever been into a forest was to a primary forest in Singapore. I think you know where primary forests can be found here, can you? There are not that many. There's only 3 primary forests in Singapore, maybe 4, depending on how you define it. Those of us who are ecologists, are there people who are like hardcore scientists here? No researchers in the room? Okay, I feel a bit safer now. Those of you who are serious ecologists or biodiversity people, you know that primary forests can be found in Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. Bukit Timah Nature Reserve is the quintessential primary forest. The moment you arrive at the visitor center and you look at all those exhibits there, it will tell you that this is the primary forest of Singapore. Some of you who lurk around the botanical gardens, you will also be told that in the botanical gardens lie a primary forest. And there is, in fact, a small little patch, I think a couple of hectares. But they are really the minority in Singapore. And those of us who want to see it can only go to these few places. On the other hand, secondary forests are totally different. They are the majority of the kinds of forests that you see in Singapore. And I chose to start off my presentation with this photograph, which perhaps some of you may have seen. This photograph is taken from a condominium at the edge of Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. And I like this photograph. Actually, I took this photograph when I was in the middle of a dinner party at a friend's house. And I peeped out the window and I say, wow, that's a great view. I can see the wonderful primary forest at Bukit Timah. And then right in front of it is the lousy secondary forest that we've been talking about. All right? So you see in the foreground, right? Foreground, that's 𝘚𝘦𝘧. All right? I've never thought so much about 𝘚𝘦𝘧 in my life until I met Robert also, by the way. Yeah. But in the background, you see the so-called pristine. Depending on which part of the world you come from, different terminology is used. So in Singapore, the terminology that the botanists would like to use would be things like primary forest. But when I talk to ecologists in North America, the word that's typically used will be old growth forests. Old growth, primary, they more or less mean the same thing. And then other terminology that's been used are things like undisturbed forests or virgin forests, all right? So here in this, I call it a juxtaposition of secondary in the front and primary in the back. And in primary forest, you can see particular patterns. I like to describe primary forest as broccoli forest. I think it explains itself nicely. So wherever you are in Southeast Asia especially, if you see broccoli-like forest, cannabis, then you could probably be looking at very good quality forest, right? So that's what I call the broccoli forest, but don't use that term, all right? This is just to describe it. The real term is primary forest, and more specifically, we call it a hill dipterocarp forest. Quite a mouthful, but it's simply because, according to the botanists, these forests are dominated by a family of trees called the dipterocarps, and they grow to massive sizes, right? So, a lot of us are taught about how tall trees are in the Pacific Northwest of the US, and the huge eucalypts of Australia. I've seen some of these giant eucalypts in Australia. They are super tall. They are 100 meters tall. But nobody here probably knows that there are some humongously tall trees in Southeast Asia. Actually, we have a record breaker in Southeast Asia. There's a tree in Southeast Asia that's 101 meters tall. I believe it was 101 meters tall. And this is from the same kind of hill dipterocarp forest. Not in Singapore per se, okay? If you find a 101 meter tall tree in Singapore, let me know. But that tree was taken from Borneo in Sabah. So seeing forests, I'd like to use my talk basically to contextualize a little bit about our collaboration. I don't mean my talk to be a lecture on forest ecology, because many others have done much better jobs than me. So those of you who are from NTU and met ecologists who have done some fantastic work, my job here is just to tell you stories about why secondary forests are hateful at the beginning, but the more you look at them, they could be quite interesting, and perhaps they also have value for science and conservation. So Robert has to say a little bit about how we know each other. I also have to say my part of the story, right? This is my part of the story. Actually, it's not hugely different from his part of the story. I started bird watching quite a long time ago, in 1993. That's about 20, maybe 30 over years ago. But at the same time, I also loved art, and I drew a lot. I still draw nowadays, but maybe much less than what I used to. And actually, it's because of my incipient interest in drawing that resulted in me meeting Robert, because we were in the same secondary school, and there was one year that I was showing some of my drawings, and Robert came to it. Besides looking at the drawings, he also saw some of the specimens I collected, and that's how we bonded and resulted in that first visit to Tuas. All right, so like I say, I have a very different career trajectory. I went to study ecology at university and ended up spending a good part of my early career in deep jungles of Malaysia. And I think that has a deep influence on my view of what is a good forest and what is a bad forest. So my first project, my professor at that time sent me to Terengganu. Terengganu is this state in Malaysia. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Terengganu, but it's deep jungles, and these are what you would call primeval forests. My job was difficult. I was a FYP student, final year program, and I thought that FYP project I did was quite dangerous, because one day I was doing a field survey when I was like 22 years old, and there's a bear in the forest, and I had to evacuate, so no surveys. And then 2 weeks later, my host told me that I think we can't do today. I asked him why we can't do today. I said, I think there's a tiger ahead of us. I think we have to get out of this forest. So again, field trip canceled. And then these things keep happening: tiger, bear, elephant, panther. And I think as much as I learned to love the forest for such rich biodiversity of tigers and panthers and elephants, I also learned to fear the forest because of all these things that I've see in my face in Malaysia. And then the second major project I did in my career was again in another very old forest. This was in the Indonesian island of Sulawesi. Sulawesi is far away. I think a lot of us in this room know Sulawesi for one simple reason, because it produces some pretty good coffees, right? You go and look at the coffee, there are Toraja coffee. That's good stuff from Sulawesi. But Sulawesi, I call it the Madagascar of Asia, has got some really undisturbed forests. If you go to Google Maps and you zoom in, which is one of my hobbies, is to zoom into Google Maps and see what's here, what's there, right? Sulawesi is black on Google Maps, black. And black is a good thing for forest ecologists, because black stands for undisturbed primeval forests. So I spent 2 years on and off in Sulawesi studying its birds. You know that I'm an ornithologist because I wear bird t-shirts all the time. We spend a lot of time catching birds. So that's my career background, looking at forests and thinking about the kinds of birds that we get into forests. But of course, I've also gone through a little bit of career change. After doing ecology for a while, I felt that I need to do more to save wildlife, and after that, I became a career conservationist, which I've been for a good 7-8 years now. And that's a photograph that Robert and I took from China. We were doing a work trip. Robert was there on an art trip, and it ended up becoming a bird watching trip because we met bird watchers in China, and they brought us to this fantastic wetland in an area. Actually, this is about 5 kilometers from North Korea. So really cool wetland with like 100,000 birds. So what are primary forests, right? Ding Li has been going on for a while about primary forests. What are primary forests? Just to reiterate on my earlier points, these are really high quality forests. As you can see here, I took this photograph, I think, also from Hillview, because Hillview has a nice overlook of Bukit Timah. But you can see the same kind of high quality forests in MacRitchie. There are bits and pieces of MacRitchie that has some really old forests. Some of this is not accessible, but you can see when you're jogging around the fringes of MacRitchie Reservoir, you see some large old trees. I mean, again, alluding to Robert's work, large old trees, and that is the primary forest of MacRitchie. And then for those of you who are lucky enough to go into Nee Soon Nee Soon is the northern part of the central catchment. You can also see little bits of primary forest. But now that this part of the jungle is out of bounds, you can't go in without a permit. Because I think well, actually it's a good reason. The government has decided to restrict access because we all know that this is really good for biodiversity and we should do what we can to protect it. So this is a typical primary forest you can see in Singapore. But as we know, primary forests in Singapore is now down to less than 1% of its former extent. Most of the forests in Singapore have been disturbed in history. And what we are left with is mostly secondary forests, like what you are seeing here. And I hate to say this, but secondary forest is actually a very loaded term. We use it a lot, but from a botanical point of view, as my botany friends would tell me, it's basically any forest that is not primary. It's like, if you have primary, then anything around the world that has been destroyed and regrown again, regenerated, that would be secondary forest. So secondary forest, as you will learn, it can be quite variable. There are secondary forests that is dominated by some kind of trees, other kind of trees, and ultimately it will depend on a few things. What was the forest before it was destroyed? What was the kind of vegetation before it was cleared? And what is the kind of soil we are looking at? So the soil will have an influence on the kind of trees that sprout from the ground into these secondary forests. So this one is very typical of Singapore. We actually have a few different kinds of secondary forests. But again, I'm not going to go into the details. There are a few different kinds of secondary forests around. The ones that you will see most often is this, what we'll call a young secondary forest, which, as Robert has rightly pointed out, is dominated by a kind of tree called the 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨 tree, a plant itself with a very interesting history, as he has shown in his slides. But there are also other kinds of secondary forests in Singapore, and this is another kind of secondary forest. I don't think anybody knows where this is. I doubt you know, unless you're like a hardcore nature lover. You are not allowed to enter this forest, by the way, okay? You ask me, how come Ding Li can go? Because I was there on a research trip, so I had a permit to go inside. This is a highly restricted area. This is the Nee Soon Swamp Forest. But before you actually get into the Nee Soon Swamp Forest, the whole area is surrounded by another kind of secondary forest, and the botanists will call it an old secondary forest. So it's been destroyed a long, long time ago, and it has been regenerating for quite a while. This could be at least 50 years to a century old. Still secondary, no doubt it's quite old, all right? And it's quite different from the 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨 forest that you've seen earlier on, the young secondary forest, because unlike the young secondary forest, you can see that this forest is actually quite rich in plant diversity, and that is in part due to its proximity to some really good forests. So there's a lot of seed movement, movement of animals into these secondary forests, and as a result, if you go into this secondary forest one day, if you had the permit, you will find that, hey, this is not that different from, say, Bukit Timah, lots of different plants. But of course, there are certain plants that tells you that it is secondary, it's been disturbed before. You will see that in many secondary forest types, not just in Singapore, but around Southeast Asia, they've got this very distinctive, iconic tree on the left side. You see that tree with that three pointy leaves? Yeah, that's not a rubber tree. That's a group of trees. I think botanists may know better. This is the macaranga. A macaranga is a tree that indicates disturbance. So you see macaranga, highly likely you are in a secondary forest. There are some botanical name changes. By the way, botanists are often revising the names of plants. So sometimes some of these names I use may not be used now. So just be mindful of that for those of you who want to do some post-talk research. And then there's another kind of secondary forest. This is the kind that you possibly can see more of. And this was taken from the western part of Singapore. This is in Kranji. You can see it's Kranji because you can see those towers behind. There are not many parts of Singapore where you've got these white and red towers sticking out, all right? And again, the kind of secondary forest that you see in Kranji, maybe not so different from the 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨-dominated forest, but in Kranji, in the past, a lot of Kranji was rubber plantation. So rubber trees are actually quite common in these types of forests. There will be 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨, no doubt, but in this forest, you just will see a lot of rubber and a few more other native plants on top of rubber and 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨 and another very famous invasive tree in Singapore called the African tulip, which produces nice, colorful red flowers that you can see, one of the more colorful trees you see in Singapore. Now, in front of the Kranji forest that you can see here, this is, of course, a freshwater marsh that's on the edge of the Kranji Reservoir. Yeah, and then we come to the stuff that Robert's been talking about. This is the 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨 forest. This is taken from another occasion of me visiting somebody's house for a dinner party. I would look out of the window and say, wow, that's a nice woodland there. And right, this is in Bukit Batok, in the western part of Singapore. And as you have seen in Robert's presentation, there's quite a lot of 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨. You see all those whiffy, I call it the whiffy tree crowns, right? Not the broccoli-like crowns. You see all these thin crowns. This all belong to stands of 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘧𝑚, except for the fact that this forest patch, right, there's far less 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘧𝑚 than some of the other patches that Robert have shown you. All right. Obviously, many of these forests will be gone because I think this patch may well be gone by now because I took it a couple of years ago and I was told that a BTO was going up. So this is going to be the house for some of us in the future. All right. So thinking about secondary forests, a common question that Robert and I always ask each other is, are the secondary forests in other countries like Singapore? Is Singapore special? I mean, we all look around and see all these 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘧𝑚 forests, and then sometimes we see the old secondary forest in the catchment. Would the secondary forest in Malaysia be like that? So this question was posed to me some years ago, and I started to pay more attention to secondary forests. So from being a secondary forest hater, from the time onward, I became a little more curious about, these kinds of forests. Like, are they same as what we have in Singapore, or are they going to be radically different? Are the plants going to be different as well, right? And of course, I will always be keeping my eyes tuned in for more 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘧𝑚. So one year I went to Borneo. This is from Borneo, all right? I went to Kuching. I was working in Kuching for the government. And I looked out of my hotel and I said, that looks familiar, right? This is the stuff that Robert has been telling me all about all day long. This is the 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘧𝑚-dominated forest. And so once more, I learned that, hey, this kind of 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘧𝑚-dominated secondary woodland is not unique to Singapore at all. It's actually more widespread than I thought they were. And the more you look at it, the more you will find. Recently, there was a few occasions that I started traveling to Kuala Lumpur and further north on bus. And to me, going to Malaysia by bus is actually a very good thing to do, because if you are an ecologist, you can see the change in the different kinds of forests across the highway to the north. So I paid attention, and actually you notice that all these 𝘚𝘦𝘧𝑚 tree goes all the way well beyond Kuala Lumpur. So 𝘚𝘦𝘧𝑚-dominated woodland is very, very common in the Malay Peninsula, in Borneo, and as Robert has alluded, even in the native homeland of 𝘚𝘦𝘧𝑚s in the Moluccas, which is very far away, but on the same latitude, just around the equator. This is from Kuching. All right, but of course on the hills, those forests that you can see on those hills in the interior of Sarawak, that is good stuff, right? the 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨 forest. Actually, this region is a bit unusual. This region has a kind of forest that maybe we in Singapore would never see. This is what we call the limestone forest. And this kind of forest grows on, calcium carbonate-rich soil, and lots of plants are quite unique. And then on another trip, this is obviously not from Singapore. Does anybody know where this photograph is taken? You get a prize if you do. But that's because I think most of us wouldn't. It's quite close to the sea, as you can see, but it's not that far from Singapore. This is actually from the place that most people go on short holidays, stay in a beach resort a few days. This is from Bintan. All right, this is from Bintan, okay? And Bintan actually, wow, it's actually an ecologist's dream place, because all across Bintan, there are not much of the original forest left. If you take a motorcycle and drive across Bintan, you'll see that there are patches of forest here, patches of forest there in various levels of disturbance. So Bintan is quite unusual and interesting. It's actually bad for biodiversity because a lot of the good forests have been cleared. But this is an example of the secondary forest in Bintan, on the eastern part, the part that nobody actually goes. And unlike what you see, this forest, no 𝘚𝘦𝘧𝑚, this forest is a bit more similar to the kind of secondary forest you will see if you were in Kent Park. So Kent Park has a different kind of secondary forest. It's dominated by a kind of tree that we call the 𝘚𝘚𝘚𝘚 or the Echinandra dumosa. All right, another kind of secondary forest. So all in all, secondary forest is not as straightforward as they seem. All right, it's not just albizia. There are many kinds, depending on where you are, and depending on how long the forest has been destroyed, you could see different kinds of secondary forests dominated by different plants. So coming back to Robert's presentation, I wanted to draw some lines to connect mine with his on birds, because he talked about this. One of the things that most people would notice about secondary forest would be that it has a hell of a lot of birds that don't belong to the place the forest is growing. So a lot of us who study forest ecology, we know that, hey, 5, 10 species of birds, amphibians, these are invasive stuff. They are birds from other parts of the world. And one classic example of a non-native or an invasive bird is this species. You've seen that great video that Robert has shown just now. This is the red-breasted parakeet. And the red-breasted parakeet is not native to Singapore. We know that it's not native because we've studied the old books dating to 130 years ago. The first bird list of Singapore was published in 1881 by a Scottish military officer. There's no record of red-breasted parakeet in that documentation, right? But if you flip 100 years forward into some of the more recent sources on birds, you know that red-breasted parakeet started appearing around the 60s and 70s. And I met some of my friends at the Nature Society who tells me that, hey, they're very common at Changi. This is 20 years ago. They say that they were very common in Changi. If you want to see red-breasted parakeet, go to Changi and see them. So we used to do that, but now things have changed. They seem to have colonized all of Singapore, I think. And to make things even more interesting, they have also colonized 100 kilometers north up the Malay Peninsula. I didn't even realize that until a bird watcher from Batu Pahat in Malaysia told me, yeah, I saw these colorful parrots flying around Batu Pahat. What are they? Are they long-tailed parakeets? I look at the photograph and straight away, oh, red-breasted parakeet. They might have spread north from Singapore. So one of the most distinctive features of secondary forests in Singapore is that it's got a lot of stuff, a lot of species that are from other parts of the world. And you can go around Singapore, visit all these different forests, and you'll keep finding examples of them. Right? The red-breasted parakeet is an easy one because they're so conspicuous. You go to the forest, you hear birds squeaking, it's probably a red-breasted parakeet, but they're more than just red-breasted parakeet. There are also other interesting birds from faraway lands, like this bird. Okay? And this bird is a bird that is native to the jungles of Thailand and the Himalayas, Vietnam. You can see it in the native state if you go into the rainforest national parks of Thailand. But this is a bird that has stunned me. When I first saw this bird, I was really shocked because I looked at the bird book and the bird book does not have the bird. And I look at the bird, I was like, I'm sure this bird is in Singapore. And this bird turns out to be the white-crested laughing thrush. It's a very noisy bird. Those of you who visit nature parks in the western part of Singapore, you will see this bird. When I was young in primary school, I first saw this bird at Bukit Batok Nature Park, which is a very classic quintessential secondary forest. But it seems that it's spread all around the country now, and even right here in this part of Singapore. If you just went up a little bit inland to the southern ridges, you will see the white-crested laughing thrush. For some bizarre reason, they have not reached Pasir Ris. I don't know why. Has anybody seen Pasir Ris? For some strange reasons, they're not there yet, but they have colonized pretty much all the forests in Singapore that are secondary. And to some extent, they have also penetrated the fringes of Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. So some years ago, I had a colleague who wanted to do a FYP at Nanyang, and I encouraged him to look at this bird more carefully. And so he wrote a paper on it and thought about these birds and how they have spread across. So long story short, one characteristic of secondary forests, as much as they have less species, is that they also have a lot of stuff that come from places from far away. All right? And I think for that matter, a lot of conservationists in Singapore always have had a particular negative view of secondary forests. Like, you have less species than Bukit Timah. Obviously, you're not so important for us to protect you. You have all these stuff from Thailand and from Indonesia, and they compete with our native birds. Why should we protect all these species that threaten our native species? So that has been one of the most common discourse. I use the word discourse about secondary forests in Singapore and perhaps even elsewhere. But again, secondary forests are much more interesting than we think they are, and as much as we think that they support less biodiversity, Singapore's secondary forests actually also offer quite a few surprises. And one of the best kept secrets of our secondary forests are our native species. There are actually a lot of interesting native species that also thrive in these secondary forests. And one of my personal favorites, this is something I love because I saw it when I was a kid. I will never forget this bird. This is one of the most colorful birds in Singapore that is native, all right? Native species, always found here and still occur in good numbers. This is the long-tailed parakeet. Those of us who work on conservation, we actually have this bird as a globally endangered species. This bird is not doing so well in all parts of the world except Singapore and possibly Malaysia. It's actually a commonly kept bird as a pet in many parts of Indonesia. So nowadays, to find the long-tailed parakeet in Indonesia is getting difficult. But if you wanted to see it, as some of my bird watching friends from the UK will ask, I say, come to Singapore, they are everywhere. You can go to Bukit Gombak, they are there in the park. In the east, they are in the park. In Bukit Timah, even in Pulau Ubin, there are good numbers of this. So this is one example of a native bird, even an endangered species that is doing very well in Singapore. Another example is this bird, and this is one of my favorite. Does anybody know what bird this is? I hope most people will know the name because we've been doing a lot in the last 5 years to promote this species for people living in Singapore. This is the straw-headed bulbul, and a lot has been said about straw-headed bulbuls. We know that this bird is highly sought after as a pet in parts of Southeast Asia. It used to be found everywhere from Thailand to Indonesia. But these days, if you go to Indonesia, there are no more straw-headed bulbuls to be found. Almost every single individual have been trapped out. So to the point that whenever I ask my ornithologist friends in Indonesia, they're like, oh yeah, I want to come to Singapore. Why you want to come to Singapore? I want to see a straw-headed bulbul because it's gone from our country. So straw-headed bulbul is one of those very unusual species that have adapted to the secondary forest environment of Singapore, and in fact is thriving to the point that we possibly have some of the largest, if not the largest population left in the wild state in the world, not even in Southeast Asia, in the world. All right, so straw-headed bulbuls are interesting, but of course, secondary forests do not only benefit threatened species, we also cannot forget that secondary forests are home to many common native birds that sometimes we don't pay attention to. A lot of bird watchers I met in Singapore are always obsessed with the rare stuff, all right? To the point that sometimes I ask them for a photograph of a common bird. They say, oh, sorry, I don't have this photo. I said, this is the commonest bird in the jungle. How come you don't have a photo? Because we always look at the rare stuff. But there are quite a number of native birds that do very well. And this bird that you're seeing here is one of my common forest bird favorites in Singapore. This is the striped tit babbler. It's called the babbler because this group of birds make a lot of babbly noises. Some bird watchers just find it annoying, so they call it babblers. So babblers are native forest birds, and they usually are a sign of a forest's health. So the more babblers, the better the forest quality is. So you go to a forest in Malaysia, for example, in northern Malaysia, you find 15 kinds of babbler. But in Singapore, usually there's only one, and this is the one that you will typically see. This is the pinstripe tit babbler. If you go to Bukit Timah or MacRitchie, you might get 3, maybe even 4 kinds of babblers. So again, that connection between this group of birds and the quality and how old a forest is in Singapore. All right? But then, of course, it's not just birds. I talk a lot about birds because I'm trained as an ornithologist. Forests like Albizia woodland that you have seen, the forest that you see in Bukit Batok, all these secondary forests, they have more value than we imagine for wildlife, okay? And if you look at them carefully, there are actually also a lot of native mammals that are doing well in secondary forests. And here I have 2 examples for you. The one on the left is none other than one of the very few flying, I should say, gliding mammals we have in Southeast Asia. This is the colugo, and it is actually not that common in Bukit Timah Nature Reserve if you search for it. But if you go to the fringe of the nature reserve, all right, you will find them in quite good numbers. So every time I have friends who want to see colugos, I say go to the fringe of the Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, but not to the interior, where they are either rare or they are hard to see. Another one, this is perhaps one of the most threatened mammals in the world. It's highly trapped from the wild because people prize its scales for medicine. This is none other than the pangolin. We've got 1 species in Singapore. And again, Singapore is again one of those strange anomalies whereby You've got not that much primary forest, but you've got species like the pangolin thriving in the secondary forest. It's a bit of a biodiversity anomaly. We would expect the good quality forest to support more of them, but here the converse is true. In fact, studies show that pangolin populations here are probably doing much better than surrounding countries. So after seeing a few of these case studies, I hope that I'm beginning to change your perspective of secondary forests. Perhaps we shouldn't label them as bad or lousy, because if you think about the details, the devil are usually buried under the details. They can offer refuge to threatened species as much as they may have far less species than primary forests. But then that's not all. There's also the stuff in the aquatic system. And some of you may know this crab. This is not chili crab that many of us think of. This crab is a bit unusual. I think some of you may be aware that in Singapore there are 3 species of crabs that are only found in this country. And one of the rarest crabs in the world, restricted to less than 10 streams in our nature reserve, is this species called the Johora singaporensis. I forgot the common name, but I think most of us just call it the Johora singaporensis. You would expect it to be thriving in the depth of the primary forest, but no, this crab, this photograph I've taken was actually taken at the edge of a secondary forest in the stream. Once more, this crab's occurrence in these streams is a constant reminder that there are surprises that are buried in our secondary forests. So putting things into perspective, secondary forests can be quite, I like to use the word idiosyncratic, because depending on where the forest is found, you may have a different bunch of species. But the more important point I would like to highlight is that as much as they support the common stuff, there are also many instances where secondary forests can support highly threatened species and a whole bunch of native indigenous species. Then comes to a topic that's close to heart, migratory species. Migratory animals, Robert has touched on that briefly in his presentation. I work on migratory birds, and migratory birds are things that people don't tend to think about when they think of forests, but I just wanted to tell you that surprisingly, our secondary forests support a lot of migratory species. One of the species that we often see is this species called the oriental honey buzzard. And this bird is not a bird that lives here all year round. It spends half of his life in Japan and the other half of his life somewhere around Asia, but many of them will spend quite a few months here in Singapore. This was taken from one of those crappy woodland patches in Tuas, and again shows that all these little patches of small woodland can support very interesting biodiversity. And partly because of my own experience seeing migratory species in secondary forests, I got a bit much more interested in secondary forests, also changing my view and my perspective on these forests. I think I have just a couple of slides more, but I just wanted to end my presentation by coming back to the heart of the matter, the secondary woodland, the albizia forest that Robert has been talking about. And the albizia forest, as we can see, it's a very widespread vegetation. This view, by the way, no longer exists because this is part of Tengah, so it's already cleared for housing development. But it's a constant reminder that nature is actually quite resilient. The fact that Robert have shown you those photographs, in 2000 the land was barren. Fast forward 20 years, the whole land seems to be deeply forested in albizia. The albizia forest is a constant reminder to us that nature can be quite resilient, and these forests, given time to regenerate, they can support quite a number of interesting species. I just want to add one more anecdote to the albizia as well, just to build upon Robert's slides, is that the albizia confusingly has a lot of different names depending on where in Southeast Asia you are. So some years ago, I met my colleagues in Java, in Indonesia, and they were explaining to me about this tree that they use for timber harvesting in Indonesia. They say, oh, this Sengon tree, we grow like 50,000 hectares of it. And then after that, I look at the document, oh, actually it turns out to be an albizia, the albizia that we have been always talking about. So albizia is a really interesting plant with an interesting past. It's the whole keystone species of secondary woodland in Singapore, but it also has uses commercially as a kind of timber tree in parts of Indonesia. All right, and for better or for worse, this albizia tree seems to have spread all around the region. Firstly, from the Moluccas to Singapore, as Robert has alluded in his presentation. But it seems to have also gone beyond Singapore now. I mentioned earlier on that it spread halfway up the Malay Peninsula, maybe even further north. But once again, when I was on a work trip some years ago, I was on a bus in mainland China, traveling from Guangzhou to Shenzhen. And then while I was caught in a traffic jam, I used to stick my head out of the bus and see what kind of forest are we looking at in Shenzhen. And then I saw, hey, I know that tree. And this is another reminder that this tree is resilient and has benefited hugely from globalization. I'm not sure how specifically it got there, but again, it seems to have dominated a lot of the woodlands that we see here in southern China. So I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. My presentation is not designed to give you a technical overview of secondary forests or primary forests whatsoever, but just to share with you and really to build some context into Robert's earlier presentation that secondary forests are more interesting than we think they are, and we should pay more attention to. I wouldn't say they're good, nor are they bad, but certainly they have developed a place in the hearts of many people that live in Singapore. So that's all I have to say, and perhaps if you have any questions or comments, we can take that later on when we have the Q&A. Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Robert and Ding Li, for such a wonderful presentation. Yeah, yes, I started to work with Robert for the Venice Biennale projects like maybe a year ago. No, when was it? That's 2023, right? Yeah. April and May this time. And since then, I often hear about Ding Li, even though I haven't met him. Actually, this is our first time meeting in person. We had online meetings, but yeah, I also felt like Ding Li is part of the projects and collaborating with us. And there is a very nice interview between Ding Li and Robert describing their long-term friendship and the collaboration in our first volume of Venice Biennale catalog, which you can actually download for free on our website, seeingforest.com. So yeah, in there, Robert mentioned that I quote, I think I'm most inspired and intrigued by the relationship you, the Ding Li, had with forest. I remember that you would simply lie down on the ground in the rainforest and gaze straight up for hours into the canopy just to look at birds. It taught me about being attentive and quiet in observing nature. And I had gradually learned how to look at it as well. So this attentive seeing, attentive looking and observing nature, that is actually Robert's describe what he learned from him, but it's also the core of our exhibition, Seeing Forest. So the Seeing Forest for Robert means like the practice of like patient observation and trying to understand here what nature says to us, and also so then this kind of also inspired me as well while we prepare the exhibition. So just the first question goes to Ding Li. Yeah, Robert has often mentioned how much your research has informed his work. Has collaborating with him on his art projects ever changed your perspective or influenced your research? Or for instance, you can maybe mention a particular work by Robert that stands out to you and has your interest, and so which and why and how it changed your perspective.
I think we've collaborated on art projects for quite a while, 15 over years, and Robert's perspectives have often changed my views on things that I had alternative strong views. So I think Robert has mentioned in his presentation that he thinks, he sees that I am a hater of secondary forests, and I admit to that. I think I mentioned that earlier on. But after going through these experiences, I feel like my views on secondary forests are eroding away, changing, even to the point that there are instances where I enjoy and appreciate secondary forests. One of the works that I think had a particular impact on me was the piece on the forest at 𝘚𝘦𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨. And 𝘚𝘚𝘦𝘦 was a memorable collaboration because it happened during the pandemic and there wasn't many places we could go. And obviously, it wasn't easy for us to go to primary forest. Actually, to some extent, our focus has been very much on secondary forest because it was so difficult to get into the primary forest. You got to get permits. And we wanted to get things done in a more fluid way, all right? So we pay more attention to secondary forest. So when I first visited 𝘚𝘚𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨 forest, my impression was a bit dismissive. I said, there's nothing gonna be interesting here. I see 5 𝘚𝘦𝘧𝘰, that's a bad sign, that's terrible. All right, there's no good stuff that can be found in this forest. And then we bashed into the forest, and just to prove my point, you see, we already walk around here, trip over some trees, step over some twigs. I'm not seeing 2 birds besides invasive stuff. I think we should change the research plot. So that was my first impression. And then a year later, we went to, a year before, we went to China. We went to Guangzhou for an art collaboration. Again, we also went to a secondary forest in Guangzhou. And from my own experiences in Hong Kong, I was like, okay, this forest, nothing one lah, huh? 冇嘢㗎. Okay, so we again look at the forest carefully, and then Robert has this great idea of setting camera traps. Camera trap is a mainstay of wildlife ecologists, but here is an artist who is going to put camera traps in these forests. And then 1 year fast forward, I look at the camera trap video. I was like, oh, okay, wow, that is interesting. How come got all these birds I never know they were found in these forests? So I think those collaborations were not just very meaningful, but they kind of shook my understanding. In some way, they also helped my understanding of the kinds of environments that we must protect for migratory species. So that links back to my own job as a conservationist. We need to think about secondary forests. This is one of the more prominent things, but there are many more in the past. We also did some collaborations on wild pig many, many years ago. The wild pig piece was quite funny and interesting at the same time. But what I thought was interesting was also how Robert made me rethink about wild pigs. I don't know how much about wild pigs you know in Singapore. There used to be many wild pigs 2 years ago. By the way, now there are not many wild pigs because most of them died from disease. But if you took the time machine to 1995, there are no wild pigs in Singapore actually, except for Pulau Ubin. And we were quite shocked, shaken once when we were driving along Sungai Tengah Road and Robert found a wild pig carcass on the road. And after that, we had a mini quarrel, like, who should own the carcass? Should I take it or should you take the carcass? How can I fit the carcass into my bedroom, right? All these kind of funny conversations. So that project also was interesting. It made me think about the impact of wild pigs. As an ecologist, the impacts of wild pigs on the forest, but there are also other broader connections to forest ecology, forest conservation, yeah. So 2 examples I can immediately think of.
Yeah, you just mentioned you and Robert visited 𝘚𝘚𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨 forest during the pandemic, and I recall that Robert mentioned that an instance that a bird attacked you during your first visit to a forest, but over time the bird stopped attacking, and Robert mentioned that it was maybe only after one year, yeah, that you kind of felt the forest as a home and familiar places. And then, yeah, so this like long-term observation, especially on this 𝘚𝘚𝘦𝘪𝘯𝘨 forest that you had studied since 2016 and which is still ongoing. Can you talk more about the relationship that you've developed with this forest and the animals and the plants that you've come to know there, and why it had this? I guess you have already had many other projects. It's not only in Singapore but other places. But I think this project is specifically the long-term you build a long-term relationship. Yeah, we just talk about this like attentive seeing and listening to the nature. And how did you develop this relationship with the forest?
So I started looking at Gilman Forest because there was the Center of Contemporary Art there in 2016, and and it's still there. They offer residencies for artists for up to 6 months. So I had a studio that was just beside the forest, and the forest is small. It's just 2 hectares. It's really small. I think it's smaller than the gallery cluster itself. It's extremely small, and it's on a hill. And what was interesting about the site was that that historically it was a rubber plantation. There was a Chinese kampong there, and there was also the military barrack, because photographs of this exist, and also there was Crimea, the ice cream place. Because if you walk in a forest and if logistics are very difficult, like when we did in Tanah Merah, you have to travel 2 hours on the bus, and then you walk another 2 hours, and that's half day gone, and you just reach the sea, and then you come back, that's the whole day gone. It makes it very difficult to work. But at Gilman Forest, because it's small, and there was a lot of galleries there, I worked with the people there, and there's an ice cream place. At the end of the trip waiting for you, it is very easy to start to kind of get to know a space. And actually, during my 6 months there, I could only look up and research far away about the history of the place. I tried to ask some soldiers or search on eBay images of Gilman in the past, and I tried to bring him, other artists on the residency, hey, can you go in with me because it's quite scary. And so we went in, and then it was extremely hard because there was a drongo, a red-tailed drongo, a local species of birds that is smart, it's really smart, and it can mimic the voices of other birds. It belongs to a crow family, right? And it would start singing when you approach the forest, and then when you eventually one step into the forest, you can hear it, and then it will just zoom down you like a high-speed jet, and then just before it reaches your ear, it will give the high snapping smack on the beak to tell you that I can bite you, but I won't, and then you just U-turn out, and it will proceed to follow very close to you, and then I eventually got over that with an umbrella. I would shelter myself and walk in, but it's just, and then I just could manage 10 meters and I just come out. So, and then I could just observe rats and cats walking around, and then he was right. It's extremely difficult and stupid and useless forest, and there's nothing I can do about it but except talk about the past of the forest. So for a long time, I could not personally get and walk and know and understand the forest because the history is not there, you can't see it, and the ecological life does not reveal itself to you. But I think eventually when the jungle stopped attacking me, and I kind of realized there was a little awkward path that you can walk, and then you just kind of walk through, and then you can start to hear the birds. And once you are not so nervous and frantic, actually you start to see things, you start to understand actually, but most of the time it's still boring. It's quite boring, but you kind of still, but because I grew up at Boon Lay, and then I oversaw the Tengah forest, and I just wanted really very much to how me as an artist and him as an ecologist, we could kind of talk about the space, and because it's everywhere you go in Singapore is secondary forest, just want to really do a work about this forest, try to talk about that historical layer. Actually, you can find sometimes a lot of rubbish inside. Actually, sometimes things from Daiso, things recent trash, but also maybe really old trash from the 80s, from the 70s that's there because people threw it away, and the forest has a way of kind of preserving it in its soft soil.
There were war era stuff there, right?
Yeah. Because it was a military barrack. So, but they're all broken, right? They're because I think they used to bury their trash and they destroy it, they burn it. So what you have is like little glass fragments the size of 50 cents or a little rock, and then all these are kind of it's there, but at the same time, what is more interesting besides the history is that there is a life that emerges from it, and invasive species, albesia trees, insects, small frogs, invasive frogs, whatever you have, but they are just all coming together. And I think because precisely it's Gilman, which was a British military barrack built in 1935, Early records before they built the barrack was that there was nothing there, but of course there was something, but most of the records before anything was built by the British, it was nothing. But you could see from photographs and maps that actually there was plantations and kampongs, so not so much nothing, but a kind of different usage of the land, and those was all cleared. But today, if you walk in the forest, you see stands of rubber, young, not new, not old, but kind of young and just here, so traces of that. You find African oil palm, you find angsana, you find fruit trees, all randoms of the time when the British imported all these species into the botanical gardens, and then they kind of escaped, I think, and they are thriving in a kind of a strange harmony, right? There's a space for everything, and these are all, I would say, unwanted species in a way. And then, I mean, for me, I'm a layman, they look like a glorious forest, but to him it's not good. So for me, and then invasive birds, right? The laughing thrush, kind of just always hopping around, and also very endangered straw-headed bulbul, always almost found at the edge of secondary forest, not in the interior, not inside the primary forest, but at the edge of a disturbed forest. So you start to see that there's a space for everything and every species that just naturally fall into place. There's kind of harmony that is kind of, we are not involved in this. We are not a part of that. We just created something accidentally. We imported so many plants, so many birds, and then what happens when you leave it on its own terms? And that's the secondary forest, things emerge, and no one is maintaining the forest, no one is sweeping up leaves, going in to clean the trunks in case it fall down. In fact, when a tree falls in the forest, it is said that it has more ecological value than when it was alive, because especially in the secondary forest, when the soil is so poor, when a tree dies, actually it creates another form of nutrient kind of resource for opportunities for all the insects and the birds as well. So I think also with time, because it has spent so long, and it's just maybe once a week you go in, and I go in, we stand at the edge of the forest, we kind of just observe. Sometimes you can observe up to in an hour 46 species of birds at the edge of Gilman Forest. We did that once, so that was quite shocking for everyone on the trip. Yeah, so sometimes, and because this is nature, right, it's not the zoo, so most of the time nothing is also happening. So actually that's why it takes a long time, because nothing's happening. Things do not reveal themselves immediately to you, so it takes a lot of luck and a lot of thinking and interacting with the forest to realize actually, why are these albizu trees here?
You want to talk about the camera trap footages? They were quite interesting.
So behind my studio, I just kind of, because you see, and I couldn't see the animals, and then behind my studio was this the drain, and then I just like, okay, let's put it in the longkang, the drain where the wastewater come, because it's like the most dirtiest part of the forest, and then we just put it there, and then it often gets destroyed because of the rainwater gets so high. So I wasted, maybe 20 very lousy cameras to the rain. And it's just slowly over, and it's not like I put 1 week and then, wow, we have 200 species. No, it's more like a period of 6 years, and then you realize actually, maybe about 63 species, different species actually do wander. And some of them are repeat, they come back every year to their drain, strangely, don't know why, from Japan. They visit a drain in Singapore and they move on to Indonesia, don't know why. It could be a black crown-eyed heron, not a rare species, a very common species, but you see it when it's young, and then it learn to hunt in that drain, and then it grew up, and then it comes here 2 weeks every year. Don't know where it goes for the rest of the year, but you get to know the individuals in the forest and why, and then you get some rare species like species that frequent the drains, not just here, but in Singapore, like the black bittern or the von Schrenk's bittern, and actually after that, then we hear them in the drain as well. And this drain is quite visible. When you walk at Gilman, you see on the right, then there's this drain suddenly that cut across the studios.
I think it's interesting because most camera traps that I've seen are of camera traps set in really deep jungle in Malaysia, Indonesia. Those camera traps are usually set to look at tigers. And suddenly Robert decides to put a camera trap in a secondary woodland, and nobody actually ever does that because we're like, there's nothing, so we shouldn't do it, right? So the amount of life that was found was quite surprising. Yeah.
Only because it was and I chose spots that were very dirty, that was very visibly full of human trash. Like it is so, and it must be so because I wanted to because the visual layer that was interesting for me was that this was all our rubbish, and these are life that emerges from the trash that is very visible. In fact, if you just walk into Gilman Forest, you see actually like an NTUC shopping cart. Don't know, and then a lot of plastic power things that has been thrown there for, you talk quite recent, right? But actually it's been almost 20 years that it's been there. Yeah, beer cans could be as old as the 80s, but it looks like someone had a party there last night. So it's very, and you would think that so many mosquitoes, so many trash, is so dirty, what we want to live here, but animals do not know that that is dirty, I think. To them, it's life and opportunities and space. And also they do not know that there's a barrier to the landscape where this is a drain, the forest is there. It's not.
I think the barriers only exist in the human mind for people.
And also invasive alien species, they do not know that they do not belong there. They do not know, oh, I'm supposed to go back to Indonesia, not here. They don't think like that. Or neither does a Maluku bird coming to Singapore will feel like, hey, why are the trees being here? But what I think will disturb them is if a migratory bird, it often comes and stops in a secondary forest in Gilman for the last 10 years, and one day there's a crane there.
You mean the bird or the bee?
The bird will kind of, and the forest is cleared.
Or as in the crane?
Yeah,
okay, the crane.
The crane.
Okay, the piling crane.
Yeah. But actually, you know what? I think it wouldn't care. It would just simply look and see where it can stop next. Actually, it doesn't care if the forest is gone.
I'm not sure. No, nobody has studied it. Nobody.
We will know.
Yeah.
But I think what so far what I feel about the birds or animal life that do not mind the secondary forest is that actually eventually if these are gone, okay, I do not know because I don't talk birds and I don't talk frogs, is that they will actually just make do to the nearest thing that is possible for them. They are not. I don't think they hold an emotional baggage to a drain that they visited for the last 10 years and stand there and cry for a while before deciding to end his migration forever. I think they don't do that. They will simply fly up to look for the next possible secondary woodland or drain that is possible. So I think that there's something to learn about, for me at least, is that their life carries on no matter how messed up these things are.
Yeah, we are running out of time. I know this conversation
Sorry.
is getting more and more interesting, but due to the time restraint, I apologize that we won't be able to take the questions from the audience. Yeah, our speakers have next schedules. So yeah, but I guess Robert will be around a while.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so if you have questions, please reach out to him.
But let me plug this first. So I was showing you the pictures of the 5 albizes and the project. So actually the pictures are from this book. And this is a traveling exhibition. I think one of you have at least went there. And so you can get the book free in exchange of a question that you answer is, what do you feel about the forest in Singapore? And we are compiling all the answers to make the 4th book at the last location. So if you fancy this book, please approach check out where the exhibition is at Punggol now, and it's going to move on to Tampines in
Australians and
So when it comes to we are giving 3 books away free every day. So we really hope to get interesting answers of what you feel about forests in Singapore, and thank you for those that have contributed already. We're really thankful for that. So this is part of an effort to kind of get a kind of a view of how we all feel about forests that are near neighborhoods in Singapore.
Yeah, I also would like to share two more information. So we already published volume 1 of the Seeing Forest catalog I just mentioned. You can download online. The volume 2, which is actually responding to the volume 1, is coming out in few weeks and available for pre-order if you want. So one of our colleagues will help you to have pre-order details. And the t-shirts and the puppy pins, our merchandise, are available for purchase in the vending machine on the ground floor. And finally, I also want to mention that right next door, you also hear joyful sounds, which is our Singapore Art Museum Residencies Showcase. It's currently on view. And this showcase highlights the activities and researches of various artists who participated in the 24 residency program, especially focusing on the diverse locations the artists explored in Singapore. So please do not miss if you have time. And with that, we conclude today's talk. Thanks so much for staying with us. Thank you very much.